Order. The sitting is resumed and we're going to consider the important subject of the closure of Suggitts Lane level crossings in Cleethorpes, and I call on Martin Vickers to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Holloway. As always, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and, as you say, a very important subject. I move that this House has considered the closure of Suggitts Lane level crossing in Cleethorpes. Mr Holloway, though this debate relates specifically to Suggitts Lane crossing, it should be seen in the broader context of the accountability of Network Rail, a nationalised company who it seems on this issue are unaccountable to the Secretary of State of their sponsoring department. In theory, Network Rail can be held to account in a number of ways. The Office of Rail and Road monitors health and safety and has a role in determining the level of public funding that Network Rail receives, and that they also set certain objectives. Andrew Haynes, the company's chief executive, is personally accountable to Parliament for Network Rail's use of taxpayers' money, and the Secretary of State for Transport holds some power over the board's leadership and management of the business. But the accountability on more issues that can have significant impact on local communities seems totally absent. However, to be so independent, they are wholly unaccountable and free from adequate scrutiny on such matters as the Suggitts Lane issue is clearly unacceptable. If Network Rail is able to dismiss the representations of local residents, councils, members of Parliament and even the Secretary of State himself, then it is surely time to revisit the present structures. This should not and cannot be allowed to continue. Until recently, this level crossing allowed hundreds of local residents every day to pass to the north promenade of the East Coast's premier seaside resort, quickly and easily, without the hassle of a bridge. Let's just consider the figures. By Network Rail's own figures, 570 pedestrians and cyclists use the crossing each day. The figure will undoubtedly be higher at weekends and during holiday periods, but even assuming it's a constant 570, that's 208,050 per annum, and that equates to over 2 million in 10 years. And in 10 years, there have again, by Network Rail's figures, been just 15, yes, 15 near misses. Near misses has a specifically closely defined criteria. I'll return to these figures shortly. The proposed closure was first drawn to my attention with a letter from the Route Managing Director, Rob McIntosh, dated 3rd of January. Later that month, they wrote a similar letter to the then leader of North East Lincolnshire Council, Councillor Ray Oxby, to inform us that they had taken the decision to close the crossing. Not to consult about it, the decision to close the crossing. This decision was made prior to any consultation with the local residents, the council or myself. In that letter, the Route Managing Director either exaggerated the case or was ill-informed when he stated that the crossing was very dangerous and outlining that over 50 freight and passenger trains traverse the crossing every day at speeds of up to 60 miles per hour. Remember the figure of 15 near misses in the last 10 years. Does that really qualify for the description very dangerous? For the record, there are 3 trains per hour Mondays to Friday, 1 in each direction on the Manchester service and the 2-hourly service to Barton-on-Humber. In other words, 3 trains an hour for almost every hour of the weekday. On Saturdays, there are 6 extra movements with services over to Sheffield via the Brigg and Gainsborough route. Incidentally, 4 years ago, a new footbridge was erected at Brigg Station. This no doubt improved facilities for a handful of passengers on each Saturday. But I have to say the logic of spending thousands on the project is at the very least another example of questionable priorities by Network Rail. As for the freight trains travelling at 60 miles an hour, not a single freight train is in operation on that part of the line. In reality, trains are reducing speed on their approach to the station. Immediately after passing the level crossing, the speed limit falls to 30 miles per hour. Why not reduce the speed before the level crossing? Those trains leaving the station do not have time to gain a high speed. And anyway, why not allow them to travel slowly at, say, 20-25 miles an hour until they have crossed Suggitts Lane, which is only about a quarter of a mile away? I raised these discrepancies with Network Rail representatives in a face-to-face meeting in March, but these matters seemed to be of little concern to them. In fact, their representative was very forward in telling me that given the opportunity, they would quite happily close every level crossing in the country. A laudable but wholly unachievable aim. Unfortunately, though, the crossing has been in constant use by members of the public for 150 years, but does not seem to have established a right-of-way. So Network Rail have been able to close it. They highlighted an existing pedestrian bridge a little down the line at Fuller Street, which they argued was a suitable alternative for local residents. Suitable certainly for the able-bodied, but not so for the disabled and for those with prams and the like. If it did occur to Network Rail, and I'm sure it did, that this bridge somewhere down the line would pose a great inconvenience for local residents, they chose to dismiss the issue. It is this issue, the lack of disabled access, that has been the concern most frequently raised with me by constituents over recent weeks. Over the last few months, I've been in frequent contact with Network Rail through written letters, face-to-face meetings. However, no progress has been made. During the course of the last couple of months, I have raised the matter in the House on 5 previous occasions and have secured the support of the Rail Minister, who is present here today, who asked Network Rail to review their decision. And along with my honourable friend, the Minister, I met representatives of Network Rail on Monday, the 8th of April, to further make the case. They agreed to consider the suggestion of reopening the crossing whilst they review their plans. I also presented a petition to the House organised by the Cleethorpes-based DN35 CrimeWatch and signed by over 4,000 local residents who are opposed to the closure. Late in April, I had the opportunity of making representations directly to Andrew Haynes, the Chief Executive of Network Rail. I pressed him on the situation and argued that at the very least, the crossing could be reopened whilst the review takes place. He promised that he would personally look into the issue, and he duly did and wrote to me saying no change. Within a matter of weeks, or days even, I discovered that Network Rail had erected a permanent barrier at the crossing to make it impossible for pedestrians to cross. Clearly, they did not consider the recommendation of reopening very seriously or in any great detail. The response from Network Rail to date has been disappointing, but I remain committed to the campaign and will continue to support local residents, who I'm glad to see have come along today, to support them in their objections to this heavy-handed and ill-advised decision. According to Robert Wainwright, head of level crossings at Network Rail, the UK actually has one of the best level crossing safety records in Europe. This is especially remarkable as our country has one of the most intensively used rail systems in the world. 5 years ago, the Transport Select Committee produced a report on level crossing safety. I was a member of the committee at that time, Mr. Hollowone, and I draw yours and the House's attention to 2 of their recommendations. One was that we recommend that Network Rail address the criticism of its apparent preference for footbridges as replacements for level crossings and explain what assessment it makes of the impact on disabled people of replacing crossings with footbridges rather than underpasses. They also said, we are concerned that the proposed appeal mechanism for closure orders, including judicial review, will be out of reach for ordinary people and increasingly for local authorities. We recommend that DfT consider using alternative dispute resolutions, such as mediation by the Office of the Rail Regulator. I'll happily give way to my honourable friend and neighbour.
I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. Within the conclusions and recommendations of that report of which he was a part, didn't it also say that, that there was a merit considered by the committee in applying a public safety test to any diversionary routes that then may result from a level crossing closure? And is he aware of whether Network Rail have actually undertaken that recommendation in this situation?
I certainly recall the point that my honourable friend makes, And I have to confess, I don't know whether that has been followed through, whether the Minister is able to confirm that. We wait and see. I understand that for the last decade, Network Rail have made a great deal of effort to improve the safety of level crossings. Initiatives like the introduction of level crossing managers and ever-improving technology has proven to be a success in changing and improving behaviour at level crossings. From a practical perspective, technology is probably the most effective means of changing outcomes. It is a huge factor in the reduction of deliberate misuse and human errors across the country. I see no reason why Network Rail could not implement technology in order to aid pedestrian decision-making at Suggitts Lane, perhaps with the use of supplementary audible warnings and overlay miniature stoplight solutions. In September 2013, the Law Commission published a report and a draft bill which made a series of recommendations that aimed to improve the safety and regulation of level crossings. Some of the suggestions included providing tools to support health and safety regulations, including level crossing plans, enforceable agreements between rail operators and other duty holders, and a power for the Secretary of State to issue directions if necessary. If properly implemented, these proposals have the potential to make level crossings much safer so that Network Rail feel less incentivised to close them on a whim. Clearly, there are a vast number of alternatives available to Network Rail rather than closure. I have no doubt in my mind that this decision was taken as it was the easiest and cheapest option. There was no need for Network Rail to take into consideration the trouble this would cause for the elderly and disabled residents, given the lack of powers any person or institution has to hold them to account. This is unacceptable and must change. Suggestions that a modern footbridge could be installed at Fuller Street with disabled access would prove extremely expensive. And whether that funding were to come from the owners of the bridge, North East Lincolnshire Council, or from Network Rail, it would be public money, but I would question whether public money should be spent on eliminating a theoretical risk at Suggitts Lane when there are hundreds, indeed thousands, of level crossings, many with trains passing at 125 miles an hour, where the money could be better spent. I referred earlier to the 15 near misses that Network Rail referred to. Let's remember 15 near misses in 10 years, during which time in excess of 2 million people will have passed over the crossing. On the 9th of April, Mr. Ian Stewart from the Rail Accident Investigation Branch emailed one of the local campaigners, Lynn Sales, and he said, "We have reviewed our records from when we were established in October 2005 and have found details of only one incident at Suggitts Lane level crossing, which occurred on the 13th of January 2011. The circumstances of this particular case were unclear, but involved an individual being found with an injury in the vicinity of the crossing. However, there was no direct evidence that the injury had actually been caused by a train. The RAIB received no formal notification from the industry about the accident, and the circumstances could not be substantiated, so no further action was taken." So, out of the 15 near misses, only one was considered significant enough to involve the RAIB. One near miss where the circumstances could not be substantiated when set against in excess of 2 million crossings. It becomes a massive 2 million crossings. Why close and cause massive inconvenience based on those results? Of course, people should not trespass on the railway. Of course, people should not act foolishly, but sadly, some do. We all suffer to some extent as a result. But in this instance, the massive inconvenience being caused is quite simply not justified. If anyone is determined to trespass on that stretch of railway, they can go along to Cleethorpes railway station any time of the day or night, wander down the platform and onto the track. I urge Network Rail to do the right thing, admit they have not fully appreciated the strength of local feeling, that full, proper and meaningful consultations should take place. And whilst those discussions take place, they should reopen Suggitts Lane Crossing. And my plea to the Minister is that he uses his good offices to find a solution. Thank you, Mr Hollowbone.
The question is that this House has considered the closure of Suggitts Lane level crossing, Cleethorpes, I'm pleased to call Melanie on, but I will need to call the Minister no later than 20 minutes past 1 o'clock. Melanie on.
Thank you very much, Mr Hollowbone, and thank you very much to the Honourable Member for Cleethorpes, who has been very generous in allowing me a few minutes to add my voice to those of the campaigners who have crowdfunded to be here and participate in this debate today. Such is the strength of feeling. And I think it's really important that we do acknowledge that any death on our railways is a tragedy. Of course, it must be avoided. So where those level crossings are dangerous, I completely understand the desire to close them, particularly where there is a real risk to life. But this issue is not about genuine risk. It is about a perceived risk and attempt to solve a problem that doesn't actually exist. And that has caused huge disruption and upset for local residents across North East Lincolnshire. And actually, the risk that's involved is worse now that people are having to take bicycles or if they have mobility problems across a bridge that is not really suitable for people with those mobility problems. In fact, we have got young William, who has joined us today in the audience, who has recently fallen down that bridge trying to take his bicycle across it. And has there been any consideration by Network Rail of that? And I suspect that not, because now they have removed the risk or they've displaced the risk. It becomes somebody else's problem. Having been asked about risk assessments, Network Rail now conveniently say that there is no need for them to do them because it's not a public access route. But at the same time, they have drafted factually incorrect risk assessments, as the Honourable Member for Cleethorpes has given details of. Those risk assessments to support the decision to close the crossing. At the same time, they say there is no public right-of-way. Network Rail have written to members of the public and local authority planners previously supporting that Suggitts Lane crossing becomes a right-of-way. As late as September 2018, Network Rail has confirmed in writing that there were no plans to close this crossing, and yet within just a short 3-month period, without any details or time frame being provided to the public or even any response to the former council leaders' concerns, they have closed it. After 150 years and with over 500 people a day using that crossing, Network Rail now walk away saying they have no need to take any account of the impact that it has caused to the local community. Now, there's already been detail given about the RAIB's assessment. And I think, is there something that we need to consider in that? If there have been so many near misses that Network Rail consider to be so important, why have they not reported it themselves to the RAIB? Network Rail have published various documents regarding the risk. They are completely inconsistent, one of which gives it a risk status of D2 and another one giving it one of M13, which is an extremely low categorisation. The recent risk assessment was produced and published just 4 days before the actual closure. But that is months after the decision was notified in writing to the Honourable Member for Cleethorpes, the Leader of the Council, and myself. So what on earth was the point of doing that if, in fact, Network Rail have no need to do risk assessments in the first place? Network Rail say that they've given safety talks to schools. They can provide no evidence for that. They say that they've participated in local safety events. They hold no records of those. They say that they have communicated with local residents and businesses about safety issues. They have no evidence of those letters. How can it be possible that a public body can be, one, so utterly incompetent that it can then seek to embarrassingly and obviously pull the wool over members of the public's eyes and be in a situation where not only it ignores its own mission statements about accountability, but that there is no transparency whatsoever in its decision-making and leaves campaigners such as those who have joined us today just a route of a very expensive judicial review. Now, we've got a similar situation to this in Angerstein Wharf crossing in Greenwich. Network Rail have had the good grace to listen to the Leader of the Council, MP and community and delay the closure of that crossing. If it's possible for Greenwich residents, why not for Grimsby and Cleethorpes residents too? Now, I think that they hope to get away with it, but this is a warning to Network Rail. The campaigners who are involved, who are here today, are dogged and tenacious. They will not give in, so if they're hoping for an easy exit, it will not happen. And I echo the comments of the Honourable Member for Cleethorpes and urge the Minister to use his considerable influence of his offices on Network Rail to insist on a proper consultation to recognise the hard work of campaigners like Lynn Sales, Robert Palmer and Councillor Debbie Rodwell, among many others, of the impact on local businesses, disabled people, families and the elderly who all rely on that crossing.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and may I start by congratulating my honourable friend for securing this important debate, and also I think we should recognise and thank the local residents who have come down to observe our debate today for their perseverance in raising this important issue, and I think also their perseverance in getting into the building when it's pretty lively outside. I'll talk very briefly about the railway more broadly, then level crossings in general before coming in to address Suggitts Lane. I think we'll have to recognise that rail is a critical part of our national economic infrastructure. It offers safe journeys to work, it facilitates business, leisure travel, millions of tonnes of freight move around our country, relieving congestion on our roads. And we are seeing a real boom time in the rail industry, with passenger numbers having doubled since the privatisation in the mid-90s. I want to see more progress made. I want to see that building upon that success by improving and extending services wherever viable, as well as making sure that we see services to such places as Cleethorpes with more frequent and better services. That is a point that has been made to me many times by my honourable friend, who is a champion again on this issue, and particularly on a direct London service, which is actually the subject of our last meeting. However, this growth in rail freight, comes at a cost. A more heavily used network can bring greater safety risks to passengers and to the public, particularly at stations and level crossings. And this does lead to Network Rail having to make some difficult choices as they seek to deliver faster and more frequent services, but of course must not compromise on safety whilst they do so. There are no easy solutions to this, and I recognise the responsibility that Network Rail has. They have operational decisions as the duty holders really for Britain's railway infrastructure, and indeed on safety issues ministers cannot overrule those decisions. But the point about accountability is a point well made by members present, and it's something I will certainly take away from this debate. If we look at level crossings in general, there are 7,000 actually across our mainline rail network, with many different types of crossing, assessing the different levels of risk. These range from open passive crossings with no barriers or gates, where the train speeds are low and infrequent, to crossings with full barriers monitored by CCTV and telephones. Level crossings of whatever type are safe when they are used correctly. Now, absolute safety may be an impossible goal, but it's certainly something we should aim at. What is important is that the right type of crossing is used at a particular location to achieve safety with minimum delays to the community surrounding, whether it is on foot or on wheel. The factors taken into account include the speed and number of trains, the volume and type of road traffic, the nature of the private use, the number of pedestrians and the location itself. Clearly, it has to be a local decision because what is appropriate on a quiet country road is totally different for a busy urban area. 96% of accidents at level crossings are considered to be caused by either the driver or pedestrian action, either intentional or unintentional. So it is clearly an area where safety can be compromised, and the statistics show that the safety record of level crossings in this country is among the very best in the world, but we are always seeking to find ways to improve safety. The level crossings, I think, actually now represent the single biggest source of risk of train accidents, and that is accidents with the potential for multiple deaths. So I agree with the Network Rail initiative to minimise the amount of level crossings that we have on our network, but this has to be done in a way which takes people with them and is proportionate. They have to focus upon improving the operation and maintenance of level crossings, a programme of risk assessment to identify where additional action may be needed, and that certainly includes the safety impacts of any diversionary routes. Measures, indeed, to promote the safety and the safe using of level crossings, and where feasible and appropriate, closing crossings altogether if that opportunity arises. Now let's focus upon Suggitts Lane, and Network Rail have told me that this is they have made the decision to close this permanently, but do so with a very heavy heart. This is in their statutory duties as the managers of our rail infrastructure. Let me just outline briefly the legal position relating to Suggitts Lane. It was established as a private level crossing to serve a local fishing business in, I believe, the 1860s. That business has ceased, but the public right-of-way that came with that really was not... there was no public right-of-way that went with that. It was just for a business. And that position has been confirmed by discussion with North East Lincolnshire Council and Network Rail's own investigation. But let me explain what brought Network Rail to take the decision it has done. They have observed a number of potentially fatal incidents at the level crossing, including young children crossing unattended, people walking on the tracks, or motorcyclists using the crossing. My honourable friends have both highlighted the number of near misses recorded. It was 15 near misses in the past 10 years, including the examples I mentioned above. And evidence, of course, suggests that there may be incidents unreported.
Will you give way?
Yes, briefly.
Will the Minister accept that there is only one recorded incident with the RAIB back in 2005?
Well, the RAIB records are clear. That is the truth. But we are always trying to avoid the RAIB having to get involved in anything, because if they are involved, there has been an accident. This is about trying to make sure accidents don't happen. So, yes, I recognise the point that the Honourable Lady is making. Network Rail have concluded that no infrastructure can be installed to address the concerns that they have, having taken some action with the British Transport Police to improve public awareness and usage of that crossing. Now, as the Honourable Member will be aware, that there was a public information event on the 22nd of March, and Network Rail did explain what, in their view, the closure was the most effective option for ensuring safety of the public. Now, it's very clear from the comments in this space, and very clear from the media coverage, which I have also looked at in the local paper, and also from the fact that we have had people who have made the great effort to come and join us at this debate today, how this closure has impacted upon local users, how strongly people feel about it, how it has impacted as well upon some of the businesses upon the promenade. So I understand that entirely. To balance against that, I understand also why Network Rail has made this difficult decision and recognise that it is not a straightforward matter and there is no ideal alternative. I am aware of the alternative provision, which is at Fuller Street footbridge. I recognise, again, the point which my honourable friend made about the lack of access for people with reduced mobility. It was a point well made in my honourable friend's speech, and it was interesting to learn this was a significant issue amongst his constituents' concerns. I know as well that there was a meeting last Friday chaired by my honourable friend with Network Rail and North East Lincolnshire Council to discuss this option, the bridge, in more detail. And I understand that Network Rail have agreed in principle to contribute to enhancing the bridge should this prove a viable option, and that they and the Council will be sending engineers to review the bridge over the weeks ahead. There've been a...
Yeah. But would he acknowledge that any public money spent on this project is really wasteful, to be honest, because the risks are so minimal? The money should be spent elsewhere where there is more risk.
Well, we obviously have obligations to keep our rail network as safe as possible. The definition and calculation of risk is a key factor in deciding where money is spent. All I can say is that I think it is important that we have a dialogue between the local council and between Network Rail to look at all of the options to basically come to an effective permanent solution, which I think can and must be found. It could mean work at Fuller Street. It could mean other areas as well. But I want to make sure that people are talking locally, a local solution to a local problem. I think the challenge has been well articulated by members present today, and I'm sure that Network Rail will have been following this debate. I will make sure that the content of our discussions here today are picked up and actioned by Network Rail, the concerns addressed, and I will obviously write back to both honourable members and through them to their constituents. We have a very difficult situation where we see impact on local community, an organisation charged with safety seeking to improve safety. But in this case, we are not seeing what that agreement might look like, and that is something that's of some regret, but we have to work harder to try to get to a solution that all sides will be happy with, keeping the community together, but making sure that they can travel safely in and out of Cleethorpes.